Welcome back to Threshold, where sound goes when it dies. Tonight's story will take you into the quietest town you've never heard of. A place where silence is not peace, it's hunger. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen, if you dare. Chapter 1. The voicemail that shouldn't exist. The message arrived at 3:07 a.m. A smear of sound on my cracked phone screen and a red badge that didn't belong. I was awake because I keep odd hours. Because editing other people's fear has a way of rearranging sleep. The way moths rearrange fabric, I make a living stitching audio. Oral histories, ghost stories from desert highways, old fishermen remembering fog like it was a person, a steady economy of whispers. The channel's called Threshold, the tagline where sound goes when it dies, was a joke once, then a brand, and lately a dare. The voicemail was from Emma, my sister, dead 12 years. I didn't tap play at first. I stared at the number, which wasn't hers, and the city, which wasn't ours, and the waveform, small and bright like a heartbeat on a dark monitor. The caller ID said Graybridge, MA. The timestamp insisted today. My hands would not obey me. One held the phone. The other found my collar and tugged like there was a thread there that could undo everything. I told myself because this is the kind of thing you tell yourself that. It was some sick listener, a mimic, an AI prank, but I've spent a decade cleaning static from grief, identifying what rain on tin sounds like versus rain on glass, learning the shape of a throat as it turns a vowel. There are the artifacts you can fake and the ones you can't. The order of breath before her name, the way she swallowed on consonants when she was lying, the leftover dust of a childhood lisp. The doctors promised would go away. You can lay a noise, sure. You can't layer a life. I hit play, Noah. Her voice was older than I remembered, which makes no sense, but it was. It carried the weight of 12 birthdays I never heard. It's me. I don't have time. A clatter? Metal on metal? A door? You said if I ever needed, if something happened, I should call. You were right about him. He collects. The message snapped, spiked with a hiss like air escaping a lung. For a second I heard a tone not musical, not mechanical, something between the pitch of a building thinking. Then Emma again. Urgent, breathless. Listen, don't talk. I only have one call. If you come to Graybridge, don't bring sound. Do you understand? Leave the noise behind. He hears it. Hear wet click and silence. I replayed it 5 times. On the third, I noticed the room she was in. Its echo wasn't urban. It was narrow and tall. Brick, maybe, with a ceiling that made voices sensitive and sure of themselves. On the fourth, I caught a faint second voice after the hiss. Not a word but a shape. The shape you get when the mouth opens to a vowel and changes its mind. On the fifth, I noticed my breathing had singed to hers, the way it always had when she talked fast and forgot to inhale. I called the number back, It rang once, then broke into a busy signal whose cadence wasn't right. Busy signals are square-shouldered. Enough. This one staggered 3. Short, 1 long, like a drunk heartbeat. I recorded it. I fed the clip into my software. The spectrogram showed a notch at exactly 19 kilohertz. A surgical absence like a bite out of a coastline. When I couldn't pretend not to, I opened the box under my bed. The records of 12 years. A police report politely sure of itself. A coroner's note shy around the word drowned. A photo of Emma's car like a beached animal, a lock of hair I wish I hadn't kept and can't throw away. I took the hair because superstition is a kind of handle when you don't know how else to hold on. And I took the note where I'd written the only thing she'd ever asked me for. If I ever go missing, wait a week. If I call you, don't wait at all. Graybridge was 6 hours and a rented car away. I packed light. Clothes, a field recorder, and a pair of open-back headphones. A contact mic. A tiny parabolic dish for catching whispers. A notebook. Caffeine. I left my apartment, windows open to the city's. Throom. Like Emma told me not to. How do you leave noise behind? Then, guilty, I went back and shut them. The silence that followed felt artificial, like a room in a museum, curated and careful and not to be touched. The highway east was stitched with a kind of August grief. Fog sitting low in the hollows, the smell of things that bloom at night, a hawk shredding blue afternoon into ribbons. I played the voicemail on loop until the words wore smooth and only the air remained. The bits between. Emma had always said between was where we lived. Between our parents' arguments. Between schools. Between her mania and my caution. We learned to talk in margins. Graybridge announced itself, not with a sign, but with a bridge. Of course. Over a river that looked like a wound unstitched. Broad, dark, slick, kneeling under willow shadows. Houses leaned toward it as if it whispered and they wanted to hear better. The town proper was a nut of 19th century brick and 21st century neglect. A diner offering pie that knew more than it told. A hardware store with a bell that had forgotten how to ring. A library with banners about Listening Week, whose dates had been carefully removed. I parked outside the library because I didn't know where else to go. The air tasted like the inside of an old violin case dust, resin, the suggestion of a bow. Inside, the librarian looked up the way a cat does when you enter its house. She was in her 50s, maybe. Hair like iron filings drawn to a magnet, eyes the color of records before they're pressed. "Can I help you?" she asked. "The sign on the desk," said Miss Helms. "I'm looking for someone," I said. The line sounded like a confession. "Emma Mercer." Miss Helms's mouth made the shape of a word and then changed its mind. "We don't have a person by that name in circulation," she said, deadpan, and I liked her immediately. "Are you family? Her brother?" I set my phone on the counter. "She called me from here. Today. Some towns accept freak sentences the way oceans accept bottles with notes in them. They just take them. Graybridge was like that. Ms. Elms didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't try to usher me out with a pamphlet about mental health resources. She reached for my phone and tapped the screen with one nail like a beak. "I'll need you to keep that muted in here," she said. "We've been having a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind you get when sound forgets itself." She glanced past me at the stacks. "I noticed then that the library was almost empty, and the emptiness had a texture. Pages that should have turned and didn't. Chairs that remembered being moved but hadn't been. Somewhere, a fan spun, but it did so apologetically. Graybridge listens more than most towns," Miss Helm said. "Lately, it's been listening to the wrong things." I told her about the voicemail. I didn't mention Emma S. death, because the word still made my mouth taste like pennies. Ms. Elms listened the way you file a knife. When I finished, she tilted her head. "People call from places," she said finally. "Places call from people. The boundary is very," she made a pinching motion, "thin here. If your sister called you from Graybridge, she's here. Or the idea of her is, sometimes that's worse." "I need the number traced," I said. "Or, I don't know," the exchange. "Does Graybridge have a central office?" She smiled at that, the barest flash of wolf. "Not since 1996. But we do have Mr. Keen." "Who's Mr. Keen?" "Imagine if a switchboard fell in love with a man and they grew old together," she said. "He collects what other people throw away. Phones, mostly. Lines. Stories through wires." She wrote an address on the back of a fine notice for someone named Moran Tess and slid it across. "He'll know every call that's been through Graybridge since before you were born. But be polite. And don't," she paused, "don't bring noise." I left the library with the certain feeling that I'd been filed under pending. The town square was the sort of place rebels in a TV show meet to whisper plans, while the camera cranes up the show. The bright, indifferent sky. A busker sat on the bench with a guitar he wasn't playing. His fingers hovered over the strings like dragonflies over a pond. He looked up as I passed. His eyes were bloodshot around irises too pale. "You're ringing," he said. "I'm what?" "Ringing." He tapped his own ear. City people bring their ring with them, like a pocket cathedral. He made a soft motion like setting something down and cracked a smile that would have been handsome in another life. "Put it away, or he'll take it." "Who?" I asked, but the busker had returned to not playing. The guitar looked relieved. Mr. Keen lived in a house at the end of a street that kept apologizing for not being the river. The yard was a museum of wires. Coils of copper stacked like snakes shed their skins and were embarrassed about it. There were phones of every era nailed to the fence posts. Candlestick, rotary, beige brick siblings of my childhood. A row of bright plastic flip phones that had a party and never cleaned up. The air hummed, faint and constant. A man answered the door who looked like a diagram of a man. Everything labeled, lines pointing to features as if he might forget where things belonged. He wore a hearing aid the size of a postage stamp and a smile the size of a headline. "You must be a call," he said. "Come in." Inside, the hum grew teeth. It wasn't loud, Ema's warning thrummed under my tongue, but it was everywhere. A pressure, a thought. You could not think. The front room was a tinker's chapel. Radios disemboweled, answering machines with their jaws open, copper wire braided like hair, a wall of switchboards with their cords hanging like vines in a forgotten greenhouse. "I'm Noah," I said. "I have a voicemail." "We all do," he said cheerfully. "Messages from our better selves." "Sit." He gestured to a chair that had probably held many desperate asses and plugged my phone into a little box that looked like it had been made from a toy and a prayer. He wore cotton gloves. "Tell me about your dead." The word landed. I stared at him. "Sorry," he said. "Not sorry. Easiest way. You carry the sound of the loss like a watermark. Makes my job simpler." "My sister," I said. 12 years. "Water," he said. "Always water. Grebridge is thirsty as a dog." He tapped the device. The call originated from a bridge payphone. "There's a payphone on the bridge." There was. Officially. It's scrapped. But people like to pretend. So it pretends along. His fingers moved delicately over a bank of toggles, and the hum in the room answered, went higher as if sniffing, then lower as if considering. "Ah," he said. "Nasty. You won't like this part. Try me." He turned a dial and fed the voicemail through some filter I didn't recognize. The hiss swelled, and in it I heard the tone again. The not music, keen, froze it. The spectrogram leaped to life on an old CRT. A valley at 19 kilohertz, a mountain at 8, a ridge like a spine in between. "See that?" he said. "We call it the collector's notch." "The what?" "Every town has a monster. Greybridge has one that eats noise." He said it tenderly, like introducing a pet. "Oh, not all at once. Start with the little things. The squeak in a hinge, the laughter a swing makes, the scratch of pencil on paper. You don't notice until you notice, and by then the museum's already closed." "That doesn't make sense," I said, because the alternative was agreeing. "Neither does grief," he said, "but there it is." He squinted at the frozen waveform. "He took your sister, sis. Hear that? The way she says, 'Listen is thinner than it should be.' "Ee." played the start of the message again, this time listening not for Emma but for the missing. He was right. It was as if someone had sanded the sound. The sibilants were a little too clean. Vinyl scrubbed so hard the song lost skin. "What is he?" I asked. Mr. Keene shrugged. "A habit with teeth. A rumor that learned to stand up. A man once, they say, the first sound engineer this town ever paid. He recorded the mills, the schools, the church. The story goes, he started keeping the best parts, and the best parts were always the silences between applause, the breath before a bride. Says, I do the quiet after a mother stops singing because the baby has fallen asleep. He put them in jars." Keene smiled sadly. "People still bring him gifts, the things they can't stand to hear anymore. Screams, storms, their own names. Where would I find him? If I knew, I wouldn't be here." He handed me back my phone, now weighed down with knowledge. "But he leaves trails. Places that sound wrong. The bridge. The library. The diner if you catch it on a Tuesday when the dishwasher's morning. He'll notice you. He likes collectors. I don't collect," I said, thinking of the box under my bed and the hair. "Of course you don't," Keene said kindly. "You love." When I stepped back into the yard, the late afternoon had sharpened, the way a lens does when it finds the face. Clouds bunched like old men's knuckles. The river, visible at the end of the street, had the look of a dog about to decide whether to bite. I walked toward it because Emma's call originated there and because bridges are promises, and Graybridge seemed like a town that kept its promises even when it shouldn't. The payphone stood at the midpoint, a relic bolted to the metal railing like a cautionary tale. Graffiti stitched its sides. "Call your mother, call yourself, a tic-tac-toe game, no one had won." The receiver was in place. I lifted it and pressed it to my ear. Nothing. Not a dial tone, not a hum. The absence rang. I set the contact mic against the metal housing and listened to the phone's body. Metal remembers. I heard, faint and labyrinthian, the history of every hand that had touched the receiver, the grease of fries, the ache of a goodbye in the way the hook switch wore its paint, 1,000 unimportant breaths, and beneath it, like a cellar, under a church, the tone, "Don't bring sound," Emma had said, which is like saying don't bring breath. I looked at the river. It looked back the way deep water does, interested in your way. A woman pushed a stroller past and glanced at me, then at the phone, then away, like she was pretending we weren't here out of politeness. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you know if this phone works?" She didn't slow. "Sometimes," she said. "When it wants, who decides?" She pretended not to hear and walked faster. The baby slept with its mouth open like someone obligated to catch dreams. I called my own number from the bridge because sometimes ridiculous acts are rituals. The receiver stayed dumb. Then, faintly, a ring-rung cadence. That drunk heartbeat again. My phone in my pocket vibrated, but when I checked the screen, it didn't show an incoming call. The vibration went on anyway, a phantom echo in my skin. I let the ringing continue until it stopped on its own. My hands felt sticky. The payphone was sweating. At the far end of the bridge, a figure watched me from the shade where willow met stone. He was the sort of tall that makes people step aside without knowing why. He wore a suit that would have been expensive if it weren't so old and so clean. His hair was the color of microphones before they rust. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He did something with his face that wasn't an expression, but did the work of one. I couldn't hear him, which is a strange thing to notice about a person who hasn't spoken yet. He was the quiet you get when you turn down a room and discover the room is still there. I lowered the receiver slowly. The man inclined his head with grave courtesy, as if I'd played my part well. Then he walked along the river path without footsteps, which is impossible. But I listened hard and got nothing. The tone rode the back of my tongue like a held note. By dusk, Grabbridge had the look of a stage after the audience leaves. The lamps came on in a soft accord that felt rehearsed. I found a room above the Denora bed. A chair, a window that didn't like to open. The ceiling fan made a shape of noise without quite making noise. I recorded it anyway. Habit and hunger. On a whim, I played the voicemail again. More for company than clues. This time, after Emma said don't bring sound, after the hiss and the wet click and the failure of the busy signal to make up its mind, there was a second voice. I'd heard it before as a shape. Now it stepped forward, one syllable, a name maybe, or a command. I isolated it and brought the gain up in careful increments until the room seemed to lean closer. Noah, it said, and it wasn't Emma. It was me, my voice, thinner and older, a thread thrown across a gap. It said my name with a tone I recognized from professional disasters and funerals. Instruction trying to look like reassurance. I sat there with the phone in my hand and the fan moving slow air, like it had somewhere better to be. I pressed rewind because muscle memory demanded it to hear myself again. But before I could tap play, the phone vibrated. New voicemail. The screen said, "Same number. Same impossible time stamp." I didn't breathe. I didn't swallow. I let the message open itself the way grief does when it's tired of being invited. "You're late," said my voice. "You're always late. Eats what you bring, Noah. So bring him nothing. Not even the name you keep for yourself." A pause, a sound like a jar. "Unsettling. If you want Emma, go where people go to not be heard." He leaves a ledger. He writes in silence. Read it. The message ended with the river exhaling. Beneath it, the notch at 19 kilohertz. The collector's signature. I thought of places you go to not be heard. Confessionals, basements during storms, the back rows of movie theaters no one goes to anymore, libraries where even breath is a crime, the diner's dishwasher on Tuesdays, the bridge. I fell asleep on the chair like a witness no one had called yet. In the dream, Emma stood underwater up to her collarbones and laughed without sound. shaking like light on a lake. She cupped her hands and lifted something to me, a jar the size of a heart. Inside was a crumpled note I couldn't read because the words were made of quiet. I woke to the lamp buzzing trying to. The bulb didn't hold the sound right. It trembled and lost it, trembled and lost it, like a child forgetting a song. Outside, Graybridge had gone fully dark. The river made the kind of hush people pay good money for in the city. I opened the window in spite of its protest. Night leaned in and sniffed. On the desk was the slip of paper Miss Helms had given me with Tess Moran. S. Fine notice on one side and keen S. address on the other. I turned it over. Miss Helms's pen had bled a little through where she wrote, "Don't bring noise under it in pencil I didn't put there." Someone had written, "Ledger in the Stack's local history. Ask the book that doesn't have pages." The pencil mark was the gray of ash. It smudged under my thumb and smelled faintly of rain on stone. I didn't like the idea that anyone had been in my room. I liked less the idea that the room itself had taken dictation. I slid the note into my pocket, took the recorder, and went downstairs. The diner was half full of people pretending not to listen. The busker from the bench sat at the counter staring into coffee like it owed him money. The waitress looked at my mouth rather than my eyes as if any sound I made would be a theft. "Library still open?" I asked. She shook her head and pointed to the clock. "Closed at 9, she said, then added, as if translating for a foreigner, after the quiet hour, "The what?" "Town ordinance," said the busker without looking up. "We give him an hour. He takes 2. When does it start?" The waitress cocked her head like she was trying to place a tune. "Now." Conversations went thin and then thinner until they were threads you could snap between finger and thumb. The clink of forks against plates turned into an idea of itself. The radio behind the counter kept moving light across its dial, but refused to say anything. The fan on the ceiling made circles without committing to the concept. Even the bell on the door decided it had been myth all along. The quiet hour. I thought of jaras, of ledges outside. The town breathed like it didn't want to wake the house. I walked to the library because sometimes the place you can't go is the only place to put your feet. The door was locked, but Graybridge had a memory of gentler times. The windows were old enough to be persuaded. I didn't want to break anything. I didn't need to. A window where the mortar had forgotten its job surrendered to a firm hand in the promise that I would leave everything as I found it except for the rule I was breaking. Local history lived in the back, where towns keep the parts of themselves they aren't sure about. The stacks there were tall and narrow and smelled like a canceled piano lesson. My flashlight didn't like the work. The beam fuzzed at the edges, insecure. The shelves were labeled with neat cards in Ms. Helms's hand. Mills, births, fires, maps. The last aisle was ledgers. The book that didn't have pages sat like a joke at the end of the row. It was a box. Really? Bound in leather? The color of old tea, the word ledger stamped on the spine as if to reassure librarians, inside was an empty frame of paper that never turned. But when I set my recorder on top of it, the gain went up on its own. The little bars jittered in a way they don't when the room is behaving. "Ask," said a voice behind me. I turned. No one. The box sat patient. The room held its breath the way rooms do when they are about to do something they can undo. "Emma Mercer," I said, and my voice sounded like I'd taken it off a shelf. "Show me where she is." The silence turned its head, not metaphorically. Not entirely. There was movement at the edge of perception, a shift like a large animal rearranging itself without courtesy. The air in the aisle dropped 10 degrees. On the inside of the box, words began to bloom, not written, not printed, but subtracted. The way light etches itself by removing shadow, a line formed, then another, in neat accountant's hand. Except the ink was the absence of sound. Mercer, Emma, Bridge Pay. Ode, 12 years of reign. One brother's name. 3 songs, not finished. Paid 1, voicemail. Status in arrears. A second entry slid into being below it. Mercer? Noah. Arrival? Brought? 1 recorder. 6 breaths. A pocket cathedral to be taken. All of the above. Something moved at the mouth of the aisle. A shape taller than the shelves. Narrow as objection. It smelled like dust after applause. It didn't walk so much as undo space between where it was and where it wanted to be. The flashlight went polite and died. "Don't bring sound," Emma had said. I did the opposite. I exhaled deliberately. A single hard breath, like spelling my own name. The shape stopped, as if I'd thrown a rock at a dog. "Take mine," I said into the hush. "Take my noise. Leave us." The shape considered. The ledger's newest line deepened, as if someone were licking a finger and pressing down. "The collector, because I knew it was him, the way you know when a dream has your father in it. Even if the face is wrong, made the sound the coat makes when shrugged off, except he did it with the town, outside somewhere." Then he did step forward, and the metal in the room remembered it wasn't supposed to sing. My headphones, in my bag, rattled their teeth. The recorder's bars went from jitter to flatline. "Noah," said a voice that was my voice because he wanted it to be. "Bring me nothing. I brought you a trade," I said, because bargaining is older than fear. "I brought you a story." He paused. The quiet pulled closer, curious. "Stories make noise," I said. "Even the quiet ones you can meet. All of it. Every breath. Every pause. Every pause. But you give me..." Emma, for a long time nothing happened, which in Greybridge means something had gone wrong beyond repair. Then the ledger's empty page turned in a wind I didn't feel, and a third line bloomed, simple as arithmetic. TRA. DA accepted. Deferred. Terms. Bring me the sound no one else wants. Fill my jar, empty yours. Begin at dawn. The shape withdrew as if drawn back into a mouth. The aisles relaxed. Embarrassed, the flashlight found itself again, weak with shame. I stood very still and listened to my heartbeat do its job in a room that hated jobs. Dawn was a rumor beyond the locked windows. I turned off the recorder and felt the absence like leaving a hand in someone else's pocket by mistake. The ledger closed itself without moving, on its spine. The stamped word looked honest. I backed out of local history one careful foot at a time, like leaving a pew without letting your knees creak. At the door, a shadow waited that resolved into Ms. Helms. She held a key as if everyone agreed it meant something. "You're lucky I like you," she said. "The town doesn't." She looked past me toward the back. "Did he sign you?" "He left terms," I said. She grimaced. "He always does. I need Emma." She nodded once, the sort of nod that means, "Who doesn't? Then you'll do what he asks." She opened the door and the quiet hour reached its hands back into the street like a pickpocket, taking last little sounds it had missed. "Noah," she said as I stepped into the thinning dark, "if you bring him something you can't get rid of, he won't either. That's the trick. What doesn't anyone want to hear?" I asked. She smiled without joy. "The truth. But it's noisy. Outside, the town's noise came back like a tide that had changed its mind. A truck coughed. A dog barked and was proud of it. Somewhere a radio forgot it was shy. The river kept its counsel. Above it all, hunger took notes. Dawn scraped its thumbnail along the eastern sky. I went to meet it with a jar inside my chest and the knowledge that I had promised a monster what monsters eat. I thought of Emma under the water, laughing without sound, and wondered what death smells like when you open it. And because some things demand to be said where rooms can hear them, I spoke into Greybridge, careful and loud enough to be stolen. I'm coming. Chapter 2. The Ledger of Lost Things. Morning in Greybridge was a morning the way cities know. No rush of brakes, no trash trucks sighing, no neighbors' arguments through thin walls. Instead, the dawn arrived as a draft under the diner's door, as condensation gathering on the empty salt shakers, as a silence rehearsed and practiced until it was stronger than sound. I sat at the window and watched the town wake by refusing to admit it had slept. The waitress refilled my coffee, though the pot made no sound when she poured. "Ledger still breathing?" she asked softly, as if the question itself might draw attention. "More than breathing," I said. "It signed me?" She nodded once, unsurprised. "It does that. Don't let it choose thee." Outside, the square gathered its people the way a throat gathers words. The busker still held his mute guitar. Miss Elms locked the library door from the outside, eyes scanning me like she was shelving my intentions. And near the bridge, the suited figure from last night lingered in daylight, sharper, his edges cut from refusal rather than shadow. He didn't move. He didn't need to. He was noise denied. I walked to him because monsters prefer you to be polite. My field recorder felt heavy in my pocket, a promise I couldn't keep. The collector's presence hollowed the street, vacuumed echoes from brick, folded up the wings of pigeons mid-flutter until they coasted in silence. "You signed," he said. His voice was mine, but older, emptied of its body like a shell still echoing the tide. "I traded," I answered. "You keep what no one else wants, so I'll bring you the unwanted truth," he said, as if savoring it. "Pain, confession, the little deaths of honesty. Yes, bring me those." His pale eyes caught the daylight wrong, like lenses not meant for sun. "In return, the girl, my sister," I said. "Emma Shios," he said simply, and the ledger's words burned behind my eyes. "Old. 12 years of reign. One brother's name. 3 songs not finished. Debt binds tighter than love, but trade may loosen what binds, if you can pay." I swallowed. Where sound dies quickest? The mill, the church, the asylum ruins at the hill's edge. They bleed silence like open veins. "Fill your jar there." He tilted his head toward my recorder. "Begin." I walked away because bargains only last as long as you don't overstay. The river's hush followed me like a leash. The Graybridge Mill had died long before I was born, but its bones still stood. The wheel was skeletal, ribs gnawed by weather. Inside, dust layered itself into history. My footsteps left imprints in silence. The recorder's red light blinked with appetite. I set it on a rusted table and whispered, "Tell me what you don't want heard." The room responded, not with words, not with movement, but with an inhalation of secret left by workers long gone. Curses bitten back at overseers' moans, swallowed in the clatter of gear, songs cut short when fingers bled too much to play along the metal. The recorder shook. Its spectrogram spat out lines jagged as scars, and then, beneath it all, a woman's voicemas. Voice echoed faintly, as if her sorrow had been stored here too. I clutched the device to my chest. The jar inside me felt heavier. The church, Graybridge's church, leaned against the sky like it regretted making promises. The steeple was mute. No bell dared to speak. Inside, pews crouched in dust. I sat where sunlight fractured through stained glass, the Virgin's mouth frozen mid-song. "Truth," I said into the recorder. "Take it." And the confessions came not from lips, but from wood grain, from stone pores, from hymenals left behind. Murmurs of infidelity whispered in knots of oak. Hatred hummed beneath painted saints. The quiet agony of faith misplaced poured like water through cracks. The collector's ledger fed itself through my device, each notch another line added to my debt. In the stillness, I heard my own voice again, not playback, but prophecy. Late, Noah. Always late. The asylum. The ruins waited at the hilltop, a scar dressed in ivy. Windows gaped without glass. Doors sagged like broken promises. Local kids had painted dares on the walls, but the paint made no sound. Even the graffiti was hushed. Inside, silence was total. It pressed my eardrums until my balance swayed. My recorder trembled before I touched it. "What don't you want to hear?" I asked the void. The answer was immediate and crushing. Screams that never escaped throats, sobs strangled by straps, the rattling of beds where no one slept, the endless shuffle of forgotten feet. A hurricane of the unspoken. My recorder glowed red-hot, devouring what the town had hidden, and then I heard Emma Cleara now, as if closer. "Noah, don't empty yourself. He'll take more than you give." Her warning fought the hush but bled away quickly. Still, it stayed with me. I clipped the recorder off. Enough. More than enough. Back at the bridge by dusk, the collector waited. His shape was taller in twilight, as if shadows lent him inches. I set the recorder on the rail. The device hummed like a jar ready to burst. "I brought you what no one wants," I said. "Mill grief. Church confessions. Asylum screams." He reached without moving, and the recorder's hum emptied into him. The air shuddered. The river leaned closer to listen. Then silence settled heavier than before, like a ledger balancing itself. "Emma," I demanded. "No." The collector inclined his head. "Next debt," he said. "Paid in full. She walks. Defaults. She drowns again. Where?" My throat ached with fury. "The place even silence avoids," he said. "This cemetery at Hollow Send. Midnight. Bring nothing you wish to keep." He turned, and the town exhaled relief. Lights flickered back into existence. A cur horn dared to sound on Main. Somewhere, a baby cried, and its mother didn't hush it, but my ledger page glowed in memory. To be taken. All of the above. Emma was closer, but so was the void that wanted my name, my breath, my story. And Grubridge, ever listening, waited for me to fail. Chapter 3. Hollow's End, where silence won't walk. By 11:30, the town had cinched itself around its heartbeat and hidden the key. Windows lowered their lashes. Dogs practiced not barking. The diner darkened to the dim of an aquarium after closing, all movement and no sound. I went upstairs and emptied my pockets onto the bed. Phone, wallet, keys, the lock of Emma's hair in its foolish locket, my field recorder, the contact mic, the parabolic dish folded into itself like a sleeping insect. Bring nothing you wish to keep. What did I wish to keep? My name. My voice. The part of me that believes stories make you safer instead of softer. Emma's hair. But superstition is a jealous god. If you carry it where it can be stolen, it thinks you wanted it, take it. I set the locket on the pillow as if tucking in a child. I took only a pencil, a small notebook, and a cheap flashlight with a lens scuffed by someone else's mistakes. The Buscarescadif you could call a torn coaster with a name. A card sat on the nightstand. He'd given it to me that morning without looking up. On it, in blocky pen, gray, no last name, maybe not a name at all. A color. As I reached for the door, the room's silence changed shape, as if standing up. "You'll need this," said a voice the furniture had saved for emergencies. A metal object lay on the floorboards by the window where it hadn't been before. It was a key, bright as if polished by mouths. On its bow was stamped a bell. On its shaft, a number, 0. "Thanks, sir," said to no one, and left. Hollow's End was beyond the last houses, past the field where grass grew politely and then stopped as if told its opinion didn't matter. The road to it didn't like to be remembered. My feet kept forgetting they had already taken these steps. A fog gathered low, not river fog, but the kind you get when a town makes a decision and those in tea want witnesses. The cemetery gate was iron woven to look like sorrow. On each finial, a small bell hung, none moved. The key fit the lock, though I hadn't expected it to. When it turned, it made no click, just the suggestion of permission's breath. Inside, the stones were modest and stubborn. Names had been swallowed by rain and deliberate. The paths were not paths so much as compromises where feed had argued with grass for a century, and the grass had won but felt bad about it. At the center, a circular clearing waited, the way a stage waits, full of the exact amount of silence that tells you it has held speech and will again. The collector stood there already. Of course he did. He wore a different suit, or the same suit reinterpreting itself. His face borrowed mine again, but the eyes were his, pale engines, humming at a frequency I couldn't hear and didn't want to. "You left the hair," he said, voice approving and mine. "Good boy." "Don't," I said, and I was proud that the word didn't crack. He ignored me, the way a river ignores a stone that thinks it is permanent. "You understand terms, Noah. That will help. Now, payment." He gestured, and the clearing arranged itself to be more obedient. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew. "The noise only you can make," he said. "Your true name, not the one undocumented, the one you used when you first learned to be cruel to yourself. Speak it. Give it up. I will put it in a jar. In return, the girl breathes above water for the first time since she learned what drowning costs. My throat locked. That's not a name. All names are injuries we decide to wear, he said gently. Speak it, and you will be lighter. He was right. That was the danger. I closed my eyes and found the word I carried since childhood, that soft-bladed epithet I used when Emma shone, and I didn't. T when teachers praised her and overlooked my careful margins when I was responsible and she was wildfire. Coward. He felt it move in me the way a shark feels the sea change when fish decide to school. He smiled with my mouth. Yes, I won't, I said. You will, he said, and the bells on the gate trembled without ringing. Debt binds tighter than love. Wind passed. Except it didn't, because wind makes noise, and Hollow's End didn't. The trees arranged their leaves. When didn't? The ground exhaled dust that refused to be seen. Trade. Then, I said, you like trades. I'll bring you more of what no one else wants to hear. You already did, he said. I ate it. I want what you won't throw away. His eyes flicked toward my chest. Your breath, then a portion. The breath you save for panic. Give me that. I'll take its sound. You'll breathe quieter, and she'll walk. I thought of Emma laughing without sound in dreams, of the jar the size of a heart. I thought of Ms. Helms's warning. If you bring him something you can't get rid of, he won't either. I thought of Keen. He likes collectors, not breath, I said. A confession. He tilted his head, interested. The fog leaned in too. The night Emma died, I said. Each word Akia didn't own. She called me, not the voicemail. That night, I was editing. Deadline. She asked if I could pick her up because she didn't want to drive. I told her I couldn't. I told her she'd be fine. I muted the phone and returned to the track. I edited out the breath of a stranger to make a story tighter while my sister drowned. I decided silence sounded better. That's my noise. Take it. He closed his eyes as if tasting something rich. The notch in the air at 19 kilohertz deepened until I tasted metal. Better, he said. Closer? But not enough. Give me the word you keep for yourself. I couldn't say coward. Not here. Not to him. I didn't know why until the answer rose. Because he would keep it, and I would be free of it. And I didn't deserve that yet. Some weights you put down only when the person you hurt can watch you do it and decide if they forgive you. No, I said. He came nearer. His hands were empty and so full of taking that my skin bristled. Say it. A chime sounded almost. The nearest headstone, a modest granite pillow stamped, Moran shifted its moss as if clearing its throat. The name flickered. Tess, I thought absurdly, seeing the library find notice in my head, the ink that had bled through to bring me to Keen. The stone didn't change. Something behind it did. The ground there was quilted with indentations like rows on a ledger. "You won a name," said a voice that tried to be a whisper and failed at humility. "Take mine." Gray stepped into the clearing, guitar slung across his back like a promise he kept meaning to keep. In one hand he held a jar that had once contained peaches and now contained something the exact weight of regret. In the other, he held a pick. The pick was bone. Maybe the town sleeve, the collector said, not turning, because he didn't have to. The command erased 3 bird thoughts and a memory I'd been saving for later. "Nah," Gray said, and smiled the smile I'd seen that first day, the one that could be been handsome if it wanted to join the world. "I brought payment. Mine. Names. I don't need any more." He held up the jar. It was filled with scraps of paper, each with a word. Drunk, thief, fool, son. They fluttered without moving. The air inside was heavier than the night. The collector's hunger skittered over the glass like a wasp trying to figure out a window. "You're late," he told Gray. "Always," Gray said. "But I play on time." He took the guitar off his back and didn't strum it. He held it like a shield made of songs. "You want coward from him. You can have coward from me. I've earned it plenty. Take mine and let him keep his breath for when he needs to lie to himself that he can win." "Charity is noisy," the collector said, displeased. "Noise I do not keep." Gray laughed without sounding elegant. "Terrible thing. This isn't charity. It's a bet. He'll owe me if he lives." He looked at me. "Pay me later with a beer I can hear fizz." I shook my head minutely. "Don't. Too late," Gray said. "We're all already music in a jar." He held up the peaches jar again. "Pick one, Mr. Curator. I promise the good ones are in the bottom." The collector considered. He loved trades. He loved rules more. Taking coward from Gray wasn't the same as taking it from me, but the ledger wanted something tonight. I could feel its itch under my tongue. He reached, and the jar slid loosened itself like a volunteer. A wind that wasn't stole out and went for the collector's face. The scraps rose like moths toward a porch light and then froze. Every paper caught midway, each word the shape of a noise that hurts. The collector inhaled, and the scraps vanished, except for one that stuck to his cheek like a wet leaf. The word on it was son. He plucked it off. Unreadable. "You always were troublesome," he told Gray without using my voice. "Same," Gray said, pleased. "Now, the girl." "Terms are mine," the collector said. "But I am not petty." He turned to me. "You still owe." But for a moment, the account opened. He lifted one hand. The ground at the clearing's center altered. Not a mound, a hollow. Not a grave, an absent, manufactured in the shape of a door. From it, a sound emerged so small that only a brother could hear it. the second syllable of my name. Spoken as if someone were finding their way out of a dark room and needed a map. Emma, I said, and fell to my knees without meaning to. The hollow filled with water that refused to reflect. A face rose under it, pale as a rehearsal. Emma looked up the way she used to look up from the deep end when we were kids, and I sat on the edge with my feet in, pretending to lifeguard. Her hair spreads like King Kun cap. Her eyes found mine with the impatience that had made teachers say she was gifted and made me tired. She put her palm to the surface. There was a film between us, something thinner than glass and older than rules. The membrane trembled and did not break. Walk, the collector said conversationally. As agreed. Emma's mouth-shaped words I couldn't hear. I read them anyway. You took too long? Then you're here? I already did, I said, throat hot. Not enough, the collector corrected. Very kind. Emma's face tightened the way it did when she decided to do something reckless and make it look like improv. She drew back her fist and punched whatever separated us. The cemetery's bells woke and sat up and realized they were tethered by wires strengthened by the town sphere. They did not ring. Cracks spidered the air, not sound. The idea of sound. The film between us flexed. Don't, Gray warned. Too late for warnings as a category. Emma punched again. The second time, the membrane gave. Water went nowhere. The hollow refilled with absence. The ledger whether, the one in the library, or an older edition bound in the dark flipped. An invisible page. Emma's hand tore through into night air. She seized my wrist. Her grip had the strength of bargains. I pulled. She rose like a wrong thought, discovering it could be spoken. When her head broke the surface of what wasn't water, she inhaled like a newborn. It was the ugliest sound I'd ever heard. The collector flinched. His mouth thinned. Debt cancelled, Gray said brightly. Hoping, the collector shook his head, almost paternal. Debt transformed. He looked at me, and the air leaned his way. She is yours now, Noah, as she was, as she will be. What is owed is moved to your line. That is what brothers do. I'll pay, I said, because of course I did. Soon, he agreed. Pleased to have me saying the things he liked. One more thing. Return what you stole. Emma coughed color back into her lips. She stood on the grass that was not wet and looked at me with gratitude. She didn't want me to see an anger she didn't want me to ignore. He means your confession, she croaked. He wants it back. Confessions aren't boomerangs, I said. The collector smiled. They are when edited. That landed like a hand on a bruise. The night remembered a studio, the click of a mouse, the slice of a waveform, the tiny decisions that change a life and can be mistaken for craft. "You cut me," Emma said. "You cut me to make a stranger's story clean." "I know," I said. "I know." I said it. "Say it where it hurts," the collector advised. "The river," Gray murmured, understanding quicker than I did. "He wants you to give it back where you took it. To the edit you made of the town." The collector inclined his head. "Dawn," he said. "Bridge. Bring the breath you saved that night. Put it where it belongs. And bring no noise you wish to keep." He looked at Emma, almost fond. "You may walk until then, after accounts settle." He vanished in the way a sound vanishes when a door closes on it. Still present, just not for you anymore. The fog dealt its cards again. The bells remembered nothing. Emma wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and made a face. "Tastes like pennies," she said, and laughed once, which made the fog step back. Startled, I pulled her into a hug so sudden it banged our teeth. Her bones felt like the good kind of fragile. Alive. She smelled like damp linen and old pool chlorine and a shore we hadn't found yet. I didn't let go until she made a muffled protest into my jacket and then another for emphasis. "We have until dawn," she said against me. "That's not long. It's longer than we've had in 12 years, I said. My voice wavered and did not break. "Come on! There's a diner that pretends to pour coffee." Gray fell in beside us as we left Hollow's End. He walked like someone who had taught himself to be quiet as penance. "You'll need help," he said finally. "Bridges like to keep what they baptize." "What's your stake?" I asked. "Same as everyone else's in Graybridge," he said. "We want a future where making a noise doesn't mean losing it." He glanced at Emma. "Also, I owed a girl with eyes like a dare." Emma snorted. Flatterer. At the gate, the key in my pocket heated as if embarrassed. I turned it in the lock and the iron's idea of itself loosened. When the gate opened, the bells trembled as if they almost remembered their job. One made a single syllable before thinking better of it. "Lee," and then silence. It was enough to make me hopeful in the stupid way I specialize in. We walked back through streets that had tucked themselves in and now peaked. In the diner, Ms. Helms already sat in a booth as if libraries extend beyond their walls wherever she is. A mug steamed in front of her without making a fuss. She looked at Emma like you look at a book you read a long time ago, and then dreamt you lost and then found exactly where you left it. "Welcome home," she said simply. Emma tried to say thank you and coughed instead. Miss Helms slid a glass of water across, the kind of water that refuses to be used by metaphor, and Emma drank like a person who had spent too long negotiating with absence. "What does he want at dawn?" Miss Helms asked me, eyes on my face, cataloging damage, measuring spines. "My edit," I said. "He wants me to put back what I cut the night she died. The breath I removed. The hesitation that would have sent me out the door." Miss Helms nodded, unsurprised. "He hates revisions that pretend to be mercy. We'll need Keen." Gray said. He can root a river through a wire if you ask not. I looked at Emma. She looked back, less angry now, more alive. You ready? I asked. No, she said, and grinned. But I never was. That didn't stop me before. We found Keen awake, of course. He opened his door before we reached it, as if the house had told him we were coming. The hum inside was worse, or I was more porous. He took one look at Emma and made a sound that in any other town would have been a laugh. And here was a release valve. Ah, he said, wiping at eyes that had not asked permission. Deadlines deliver. We need to edit a bridge, Gray said without hello. Can you wire in the river? Keen's smile went sideways, which meant yes. Payphone's still pretending. I can persuade it to accept an insertion if the insertion believes itself. He eyed me. Do you believe yourself? I do now, I said, and surprised myself with how true it felt. He led us to the workshop. He handed me a cassette that had been alive before I was. Black, transparent window to white reels like eyes. Analog forgives, he said. Digital remembers. You want forgiveness tonight. He threaded cables and breathed into sockets. Record your confession again, as if it were that night. The breath you stole. The choice you didn't make. Say it and leave it uncut. I sat, palms sweating. Emma stood behind me, hands on my shoulders, heat proving itself against my skin. Gray watched the levels. Ms. Helms held the room still with whatever spell librarians cast when they want time to behave. I pressed record. The words came easier than I hated. Emma, I said to the little window with its reels turning. You called. You asked me to come. I said no. I wanted the story more than I wanted to be a brother. I silenced your fear because it didn't fit the rhythm. I took a breath that could have moved a body and made it empty air. I inhaled. I let the breath be messy and too long and mine. I'm sorry. I will be sorry until sorry is audible again. I'm coming now. I hit stop. The reels slowed and looked at me, unimpressed. Keen took the cassette like catching a delicate animal. He slotted it into a machine that had survived 5 owners and 1 war. The hum in the room lowered. Hurry, he said. Dawn likes punctuality. We carried the machines like pallbearers, carry both weight and metaphor carefully. At the bridge, the river held its place in the dark like a patient blade. The payphone waited, receiver bright with oils of 1,000 needs. Kino opened a panel that had no right to still be attached by screws that had no right to still turn. Inside, wires nested, ashamed of their age. He clipped a lead here, kissed a connector there, looped the cassette deck into the phone's dead heart. Gray stood with his guitar in case music needed to be used as a weapon or apology. Ms. Helms faced the river like a judge who has already read the verdict and is deciding whether law is mercy. Emma squeezed my hand. Don't bring noise you want to keep, she murmured. If anything tries to take us, let it take you. Absolutely not, I said reflexively, and then understood she wasn't asking permission. She was reminding me of the only rule we never said out loud. We trade for each other when the cashier I sent Lookin', Keen nodded once. Make your call. I lifted the receiver. It was cold and warm the way things are that have been touched often by hands that earned their heat. I pressed 0 because the key in my pocket said so. The line did not ring. It listened. Keen hit play on the deck. My confession unspooled into the wire, into the phone, into the bones of the bridge. The river tightened its muscles. The busy signal that wasn't began in the distance. 3 short, 1 long. The drunk heartbeat learning sobriety. Come on, Gray breathed. Come on, come on. The notch at 19 kilohertz deepened until teeth ached. The town held still. Dawn pinched the edge of the sky as if considering whether to proceed. The collector appeared without drama at the far end of the bridge. He walked toward us in the way absence walks, by demonstrating what I assentee around what is. He did not speak. He did not have to. The phone carried him. The cassette clicked as it reached the end. Keen did not rewind. He left it the way it was. Raw. Finished. Rugged. Again, he mouthed. I pressed record. I said the same words. I said them worse. I left the stumbles. I let the Apolli refuse to be beautiful. King hit play into record, making a loop of regret that did not improve with repetition. The collector stopped, with his toes at the clearing in the bridge's middle, where years of footsteps had worn the metal thin and filled the gaps with stories. He lifted his face like a dog catching a scent, and then closed his eyes as if experiencing a private meteorology. He opened his mouth. My voice came out. You are on time, he said, and I wanted to punch his teeth in and hated that they were mine. The river rose an inch without rising. The town leaned forward, not to hear, but to prevent hearing. Accounts, the collector said. Approach balance. He pointed at the phone. Say the name. I didn't know which name he meant. My true name, Wunda Emma. Die Kanzlera. Vella? Keen shook his head very slightly, like you shake your head at a child about to touch a stove. Miss Helms folded her hands over one another like covering a book she doesn't intend to let anyone check out. Emma squeezed my hand until bones remembered their jobs. Say ours, she said. Both. I lifted the receiver harder, as if pressure could make it less a throat shared. Emma Mercer, I said. Noah Mercer. The wrong busy signal blossomed. The notch sang its absence. The sky remembered what it had come here to do. Turn. The membrane that had held between Emma and Arid Hollis and rippled along the bridge. A film I could not see and could feel. It pressed against us. It asked a question. Let it take me, I said before I could not. The film came down like a curtain, and I stepped into it because that is what brothers do when the show must go on. Dawn tore a small notch in the east. The cassette spun. Somewhere in the river, a bell considered ringing, and somewhere very near my mouth, another voice mine, older said through the phone, You are late. But not this time. The line went dead. The town inhaled. Chapter 4. What the ledger can't count. Stepping into the film was like stepping into a recording between the tracks. The groove that carries music without being music. My skin recognized pressure my ears couldn't. The world became a raster of almosts. Almost wind, almost breath, almost my sister's name. Somewhere close, the cassette inside Keen's deck turned like a moon with two faces. Somewhere closer, the river held still by moving. "Late," said the voice I had borrowed from myself, older and patient the way cliffs are patient. But not this time. "Who are you?" I asked, and my words didn't travel so much as appear in front of my teeth and settle. "An edit," the voice said. "The one you didn't make. The breath you left. Follow me." The membrane had incited a hallway that was not. A hallway, it bent like a question mark and smelled like the underside of magnets. At the far end, light suggested itself. I walked and felt each step make no sound and all the difference. "What does he want?" I asked the version of me that had learned to wait. "What he always wants," he said. "Ownership, not of stories, of the pauses between them. He thinks if he can keep the quiet, he keeps the meaning. Can he?" "No," said the voice, "but he can keep people busy paying bills they don't." The passage opened into a chamber with no edges, only corners. In the center, a telephone hung from nothing. Not the bridge payphone. Older. Bakelite black. Its cord coiled into the idea of snakes and then forgot. The receiver floated an inch from the cradle like a trick practicing in a mirror. "Operator," my older voice said, as if making a prayer. The phone rang once. Not a sound. A subtraction. I felt it take something I didn't need doubt. Maybe and leave something I did. "A number?" "0, I said aloud, and the key in my pocket warmed. The bell stamped on its bow hummed at 19 kilohertz and then a hair higher. The way a hand goes a hair higher when you try to grab it. On the bridge, the world tilted. I didn't see it. I felt the memory. Keen's hands on cables, Gray's knuckles whitening around a guitar he refused to play. Ms. Elms, spine straight as a shelf. Emma, breath new and greedy. The collector, close enough to make the iron forget it was born to sing. The phone's mouthpiece spoke first. "State your account," said a woman's voice that had been woven of switchboards and stubbornness. The first voice of work. "Mercer, Noah," I said, and "Mercer, Emma. Balance." "Inarios," I said. "By design. Query. Conditions for zero." Silence considered me the way a banker considers a widower. Then, 0 demands equivalents of opposite kinds. Sound for quiet. Name for name. Breath for breath. Rule for rule. "Opposite kinds?" I repeated. "So if he keeps silence, we offer what silence refuses, a bell." The key burned softly against my thigh. "Bells are contracts," the operator said, pleased. "They mark beginnings and ends. He hates them because they decide when stories start without his permission." "What's his name?" I asked before fear could tidy the question. The line kinked. Proprietors resist names. A pause, then almost kindly. He had one once. A town paid him to remember them. He overperformed. "Give me a ledger to write in," I said. "I'll put him back where he belongs." "The book without pages," the operator said. "Bring it to the bridge." "Right? With what he can't eat?" "What can't he eat?" "A choice made aloud." The membrane buckled as if something large had bumped it from outside. The voice of my older self went thin. "Hurry," he said. "They need you to be the loudest quiet you've ever been." "Tell me one thing," I said. "Are you me?" "I'm what you sound like when you forgive yourself," he said. And for a heartbeat I was certain I could never afford him. "Go." The membrane peeled back. Morning was a bright coin someone had almost spent and then put back in their pocket. The bridge waited, all promise and steel bones. The collector had come nearer, up close. He was less monstrous and more inevitable, a shape made of lac. His suit was the color of tapis. His eyes were 2 notches at 19 kilohertz, almost out of hearing, exactly in the place your head aches when you tell a lie. "You step too often where you are not asked," he said. My voice rubbed thin. "Finish paying." "I will," I said, "but by the rules." I held up the key. 0. He didn't flinch, but the bridge did. Steele remembered bell towers in churches that hadn't forgiven him. Bells still slept, but their dreams turned restless. "Emma?" I said without looking away. "Library? Ledger?" "Miss Helms, already ahead of you," she said, and set off at a pace that made sense only if you spent your life walking between stories fast enough to keep them from spilling. Gray moved to block the collector's line of sight to Emma. It was an absurd gesture. "Monsters don't use lines of sight the way we do." "It mattered anyway. Sing if you have to," he told him cheerfully. I brought a counter melody. The collector's mouth did something that would have been a smile if it believed in consequences. "You will regret that instrument." Gray shrugged. "Already do." Keen pressed a plug home. The cassette deck hummed. My confession raw leapt went into the phone and down through the bones of the bridge into the river and back into the membrane and out again, until even the silence had to admit it had company. "Operator," I said to nobody in the phone, "open the account." Somewhere very far above us, a wire that shouldn't have existed found the other end it had been looking for since 1953. Somewhere at the library door, Miss Helms' S-keyring, acquired a new key, the twin of the one in my pocket, and knew what lock it was for. Somewhere, a ledger without pages opened its empty frame and waited to be written on by the absence of sound. Emma ran, then walked because the town demanded it, then ran again because she preferred apology to obedience. I didn't watch her go. I couldn't. If I watched, the collector would. "To finish paying," he repeated. But now there was a thinness to his certainty, a vibrato of doubt. "Speak the name you refuse." I shook my head. "Not mine." I stepped toward him. We were an arm's length apart, And in that arm's length were all the times I had chosen work over family, craft over kindness, the edit over the bread of yours. He tilted his head, interested, and that was his mistake. Interest is a kind of opening. First sound engineer of Grabbridge, I said, like a cataloger naming a new spine. Recorded mills and schools and church. Kept chars. Wrote a ledger in hush. Your name was Adrian Bell. Keen made a noise like a man who has found the loose wire that explains all flickers. Grey's eyebrows went up and decided to stay there for the next hour. The collector did not change expression, which is how you know the hit landed. It was, he said finally, and in that admission was a small collapse, a tower remembering it was bricks. It is not now. Names are injuries we decide to wear, I said, returning his gospel. Wear this one. Own what you took. He looked past me. Emma had reached the library. Through the glass, Ms. Helms's silhouette was a prayer and an answer. The ledger glowed in my mind the way empty plates glow when someone says there will be food soon. Bring nothing you wish to keep, the collector murmured, almost to himself. And you bring me law. He said the word as if it were a dare. Very well. Law can be eaten too. He raised a hand. The notch sang. The bridge's wires tightened into harp strings. The town sagged at its joints. He would swallow the bell. I understood if I let him. He would swallow 0. Gray, I said. Gray nodded once. He didn't strum. He pressed his palms flat across the guitarist's strings and dragged it slow, a gesture that should have made nothing but a whisper. It made a shape instead, a soft-pitched scrawl that lives below hearing and above meaning. It wasn't music. It was glue for the parts of a day that lose their way. The notch at 19 kilohertz shivered. It tried to go higher and couldn't. It tried to go lower and couldn't. It found itself held. Good trick, the collector said, approving despite himself. A prepared silence. Learned from watching you, Gray said, teeth bared. Emma reappeared at the end of the street, ledger box in her hands, hair wild, face set. The town bent to trip her, and thought better. She reached the bridge, breath loud and holy. Miss Helms followed, keys chiming without noise, mouth a straight line saying, "Don't you dare to the day?" "Right," the operator's voice said inside my mouth. I took the ledger. It weighed less than grief and more than bad habits. Inside, the empty frame waited like a dare. I didn't have ink. I didn't have pages. I had a choice made aloud. Adrian Bell, I said clearly, and the bells along the cemetery fence far away remembered for a second and trembled. You took sound that wasn't yours. You kept quiet. That belonged to others. You ate pauses that should have been breaths and called it curation. Here is the new line. I set the ledger on the bridge rail and leaned over it until I could see my face reflected in the nothing. I spoke into the empty and watched the words take form by subtraction the way stars take form by not being daylight. Bell, Adrian Curator Ode. All bells rung and unrung, all names spoken and unsaid, all pauses purchased and unpriced, paid. The ledger accepted the line like a lock accepting a key it had misjudged decades ago. The bridge rang one note, thin and sweet and furious. The collector took a step back. He didn't mean to take. "You can't count that," he said, almost childlike. "You can't count me." "Watch me," I said. And for the first time since I buried Emma in a town that wasn't this one, the sentence didn't feel like bravado. It felt like work. Keen threw a switch. The cassette clicked and reversed and played silence. Not the absence, but the recording of it, the hiss, the room's size, the breath I hadn't caught. It flooded the phone, the bridge, the ledger. It filled the notch he had carved in the air with a mold made of what he hated. Evident. Adrian Bell's face, which had borrowed mine my whole time here, let go of it. For a heartbeat, I saw the man he had been. A neat beard, a clerk's eyes, hands stained with lacquer. A person who had loved his town and strangled it, rather than let anyone else handle it clumsily. He reached for the ledger the way a drowning man reaches for the person he is pulling under without meaning to. "Return to maker," I said again. The ledger closed itself. The key in my pocket clicked without my hand on it. The bridge's bones remembered bells. The first bell rang. It was not loud. Loud would have been violence. This was dignity. It walked from the cemetery through the church that had been embarrassed to keep promising, across the mill that had pretended to be useful longer than it should down the library stacks, where books watched with the calm of saints, and onto the bridge where we stood with our ache and our plan. The collector staggered like a thought being edited in the wrong place. He reached for Emma because that is where my soft places are. Emma stepped behind me because she knows where her soft places are and refuses to give him the satisfaction of finding them. Gray pressed his palm again. Keen's deck spun. Miss Helms lifted her chin and said, softly and with intent, "No." The bell rang a second time, and a third. Adrian Bell took a breath that wasn't his and choked on it. Silence spilled out of him in coins he had hoarded too long. It rolled across the bridge and into the river and down the bank and into doorways and cupboards and the pockets of coats that had been waiting for news. "Stop," he said, trying for command and landing on request. "No," I said, and found I could finally say the word the way a person does when they not playing at being a wool. "Not until accounts settle." He lunged. I didn't step back. He hit the ledger instead, and because it had no pages, there was nothing to tear. He found himself falling into the space where records live when they are accurate. He scrambled for grip and caught a single word on his way down. "Son." He looked at Gray, startled, and in that look something human flared and went out. Gray tilted his head. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." The bell rang a fourth time. The notch smoothed. The air forgot its ache. The town learned it had been holding its shoulders up by its ears for 12 years and lowered them. Adrian Bell was gone, not erased. Erasure is a cruelty craft, teaches you to admire. He was returned to the ledger, to the story, to the place where curators are necessary and kept from eating the museum. If I turned my head just so, I could hear him, like you can hear your own blood when you press your ear to a pillow. He would always be there, but not in charge. Emma exhaled and did not drown. Gray let his hand off the strings and the guitar, relieved. Said a little word of thanks you only hear if you've been listening to instruments all your life. Keen switched his deck off and stroked it once in gratitude. Miss Helms looked at me like a librarian looks at a patron who has finally brought a book back on time and in good condition after a very long, embarrassing delay. "Accounts," said the operator in my ear, businesslike. "Balance. Zero." The key cooled. The bell slept without fear. After, the town behaved like a place that had remembered a song. Not everyone noticed. That is the nature of miracles. They are only obvious to people who needed them. The diner's bell found its voice and overused it for a day, then settled. The dishwasher on Tuesdays mourned only when death earned it. The library's quiet hour shrank to an actual hour, and then learned to mind its own business. Gray disappeared for a week and returned with a haircut the town disapproved of and a new callus built on an old scar. Keen labeled a tape bridge. Return, and filed it under a system that meant only something to him and possibly to God. Miss Helms removed the Listening Week banner and replaced it with one that said Story Festival, then replaced that with Stories Festival because plurality matters. Emma rented a room with a window that actually opened. She put plants on the sill and apologized to them in advance. She got a job at the library because, obviously, sometimes she touched the spines with the tentativeness of someone who had recently been a rumor in a town like this. The ledger kept itself to the back, but when she walked past, it did that thing pages do when there is a breeze and no window is open. At night, we sat by the river like we used to sit by the apartment complex S-pool when we were kids, eating popsicles and pretending not to count who's turned their mouth the brightest red. We didn't talk about the part where I almost said the word I keep for myself. We will, when it's useful. "What did it cost ya?" Emma asked finally, because costs waited. They did not grow less by being ignored. I touched the place behind my right ear where the notch had lived. It ached the way healed cuts ache in weather. "My perfect edit," I said. "I can't not hear breath anymore. All of it. The raggeds, the too longs, the little starts people cut so they don't sound human. It's all loud now." Emma smiled in a way that forgave without trying. "Good," she said. "Your listeners will like you better." "I don't know how to make shows with all that in," I said, and realized I was wrong as I said it. "I'll learn." "You will," she said. "You always did." Late, we laughed. The sound surprised the river into applause. I called the channel Threshold Still. The next episode was The Silence Collector. I put the bells in. I left my confession messy. I didn't edit out the part where I paused too long before saying my sister's name. The comments said it was the best work I'd ever done and also that I should go back to the old style because it was cleaner. Both were true. Both, Grubridge remained a place where sound went when it died, but it also became a place where sound came back when it needed to be accounted for. The payphone on the bridge occasionally rang. Sometimes no one answered, and that was fine. Sometimes a teenager did, and heard only a dial tone that sounded like a beach in winter and told no one because language is a trap. Sometimes I did, and heard my own older voice remind me to drink water and go outside. We returned the key to Miss Helms, who hung it on a hook behind the desk labeled in case of inventory. She winked at me and at Emma separately so we would each feel specifically chosen. Keen took the peaches jar with the words in it and buried it under a willow. Gray watched him and hummed something that made leaves settle. On a morning I didn't plan to remember, I walked to Hollow's End alone. The bells were quiet, but not because they were afraid. I stood in the clearing and thanked the ground for believing in arrangements. I said Adrian Bell's name and wished him the small grace of boredom. The air shifted as if someone shrugged in a pleasant way. On the way back, near the bridge, I passed a boy tuning a cheap guitar. He frowned at his D-string like it had betrayed him. Grey appeared from nowhere and adjusted the peg by a hair. The boy hit the chord again. It rang. Good, Gray said. Now ruin it. A little. The boy looked confused and then delighted, and then ran home to play for someone who would pretend to be annoyed and be grateful. Emma walked beside me the last block. We said nothing, not because the town demanded it, but because no sentence we could make right then would be better than the fact of our feet making the sound that says we are here. At the library door, Miss Helms flipped the sign to open with the theater of someone who knows entrances matter. She paused, looked at us, considered the chisel of the day, and said, "We need a volunteer to head the oral histories. People have things to say. We'll keep the breaths in." Emma looked at me. "I'm late," I said, "but I'm here." We went inside. Outside, the river said yes to no one in particular and went on doing its job. And in a workshop at the end of a street ashamed of not being water, Keen labeled a new tape. Threshold Ledger 0. He smiled to himself and, for a second, to someone else. If you hold that tape to your ear very carefully, and you listen in the half-second before I speak, you can hear a bell that isn't a bell, a breath that isn't edited, a town deciding to keep itself honest. You can hear a man who used to be only a collector learning to be a curator. You can hear me forgiving the part of myself that loves silence too much to let other people have it. It's not music, it's better. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more long dark tales every week. Leave a comment below with what haunted you the most about tonight's story. And remember, silence always listens back.